and he was instructed no more idol worship. And when he came down from the mountain, he saw idol worship going on. Is that correct? Something along those lines?
Yes.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Mm-hmm. I think that God said, it's not that he said no more idol worship. This is just a small, no, not really a major issue, but God apparently said, idol worship is one thing that you don't do. It wasn't as though they had been doing it before, but he just said the law is, it's rule number 2, commandment number 2. Don't worship, don't create for yourself any graven image and bow down to it, and don't worship anything or anyone other than me. So, and then Moses came down the mountain and saw that they'd built this golden calf and apparently they were worshipping it. So he got angry.
Yes, and I don't know if it's there in the biblical scripture, but he may, and correct me if I'm wrong, he may have said no worship of false idols. So, man-created idols or idols that are not Bhagavan, not that supreme being. And
yes, that's the import.
Yeah, so that's actually quite an important distinction, and thank you for bringing that, Bhadra. Not false idols. And let's look at a little bit now. What were the idols that they were worshipping at that time? So it wasn't just like a golden form of Nandi in front of the Shiva Linga. They were worshipping Baal. And some of these golden forms of bulls, they were doing child sacrifice, and they would put a baby inside the bull. They would light a fire under the bull, and the screams of the baby coming out through the mouth of the bull would sound like a bull, bellowing. So this is the kind of the demonic idol worship that was going on in some parts. So it's completely natural and understandable that Moses received that instruction that, hey, let's knock that on the head. So for those coming with the Abrahamic samskars, the religion from that background, when they hear idol worship, the worship of form, this is the samskar that they are coming with. And this is exemplified quite well when the missionaries came to India in the 16th century. So perhaps you know that Christianity has been around in India very long time. Some say since 50 years AD from St. Thomas. He came. Scholars have some doubt whether this is true or not, but some say he came down through Pakistan into northwest India. Others say he came down into southern India. But there's been a long-standing history of Christianity in India, and then there was what was called the Syrian Christians. So when the Portuguese arrived in 1492 in India, and then the Catholic missionaries started to come, I think around the 16th century, then actually they were surprised to see that there was already pre-existing Christian colonies in India. And those Christian colonies, they actually had absorbed and adopted many Hindu practices. So there was actually some points of contention between the Christian colonies that were already there and then the Catholic missionaries that came to India via the Portuguese. And some of them were more orthodox, and some of them were more liberal and adaptive to Hindu. I'm just using that as a term of communication, but it's not really a proper term to use. But so there was people like Roberto di Nobile from Italy, who he actually dressed as a sannyasi, and he even lived as a mendicant, took the Brahminical haircut, took vows of renunciation, and he was spreading Christianity in that way. And he was very much appreciated by the local people. And an interesting point is they still have the sketches of some of the missionaries when they came to India in the 16th century. So let's just see now that those Christian missionaries, they're coming with a samskara of idol worship, means worship of demonic forms with child sacrifice and all this going on. This is the samskars, this is the impressions in their consciousness that these missionaries are coming with, So then they're coming to India, and then what do they see when they get to India? Whole lot of temples, all these forms, Kali Ma, Vishnu, and today they still have the sketches of what those missionaries, what they saw when they came to India. So in those sketches, they have murtis, they have these forms in the temples with horns and all kinds of features, which they do not have whatsoever. So this goes to illustrate that we don't see reality really as it is. We see it so much through our samskars, through these lenses of perception that each one of us has. And these lenses of perception are so heavy and conditioning, and we project so much through that. Oh, this person is like that, this one, whatever. And we just see any little thing. Okay, so now we're seeing a form. Oh, forms are so therefore it's got horns and all these kinds of things are going on. So it's quite a vivid demonstration of just how powerful samskars are. So this is what some of the missionaries, they were subjectively perceiving that the Indians were worshipping when they came to India. So therefore, this Western heritage that so many of us inherit, this samskar is latent within that. So it's a very big obstacle to get over. And another component of this...
What's the samskar, sorry? The samskar that Westerners have in that regard?
So let me just define a little thing. When I'm saying Western, what does that actually mean? Because it's not really a line in the sand geographically. So one... you can frame it that way if you want to, but personally it's not really how I used it. One scholar, he defines it as an Abrahamic heliocentric synthesis. So when the Abrahamic religions and influence of Greek philosophy, when they come together, then that import becomes part of our social inheritance. This is personally how I'm using the term Western or Greater Western. Because, yeah. Does that answer your question? Maybe your question was something else. Oh, so what is that samskar? So that the samskar is one, that you shouldn't worship form, and two, form is against scripture, and worship of form basically means worship of the devil. So these are latent samskars within certain streams of thought. I'm not saying everyone in these particular paths thinks like that, but it can be there. Now another... Yes, and then you would
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
So, what are the vision statue and the Christ in the cross?
Okay, so we'll get to this. So, up until about the 5th century, when we look at Greek history, that previous to this was there was the Greek gods, right, and then the Roman Empire, and so there was still the layover of that pantheon of Greek gods, and they had forms. And then Christianity comes along. Oh, sorry, prior to that, if we take it back to Plato and Aristotle. So Plato has some pretty vague conception of God, and Aristotle, he has what he calls the unmoved mover. And that unmoved mover, he doesn't have a form. And he doesn't move. Also, his awareness doesn't move, because if his awareness is moving, then he's moving. And in order, in Aristotelian philosophy, for that being to set everything else in motion, that being can't be moving. So he used this term, unmoved mover. So up until the 5th century, many people had the conception that Christianity was a little philosophically deficient. A lot of Greek philosopher intellectual types. And then when they started to convert to Christianity, particularly, if whatever country it was their state religion, then Christianity essentially it got grafted onto Greek philosophy. So up until the first few hundred years of Christianity, God had a form, and we see descriptions of his attributes and his form in the Bible, such as he was walking around in the Garden of Eden, and perhaps the most graphic description is that of Ezekiel, where God is sitting on a throne. So this is Ezekiel. So this is a personified form of God, clearly there in the Bible, and promorphic. And then basically there was this grafting of Christianity onto the rootstock of Greek thought, particularly Aristotelian thought of this formless God, that doesn't have any personal features. So then, how are you going to deal with these verses in the scripture that say God has a form, God's sitting on a throne, and so there was a lot of controversy over this for quite some time, and there was certain streams of more orthodox Christianity that held on, and actually in Judaism they held on to God having form a lot longer than the Christians did. So then what happened was there was one, actually I think he was Jewish, a theologian called Philo. And Philo, he probably wasn't the first, but he was definitely one of the main proponents of, well, these verses are allegorical. So therefore, because you can't go against the scripture, you can't go against Revelation, and previous to this, and also still in Islam today, there's can be two streams of thought: the traditionalists who think everything must be taken literally, and then there's those who say, there's some metaphor or there's some interpretation. So Philo was one of the first proponents to say that actually these verses that confirm that God has form or attributes, these are to be read allegorically. And therefore, you can keep the Aristotelian underpinnings, but you're also not going against Revelation. And then as time goes on, and this influence, like, we should perhaps gain some appreciation of just how powerful and how such high esteem Platonic thought and Aristotelian thought was, not just in Christianity, but also in Islam. Because in Islam, in Baghdad, there was the whole translation movement. And this translation movement was going on for many centuries. And they were translating so much of the works of Plato, Aristotle, and so many of these conceptions were also integrated into Islam. And so, because also there are verses in the Quran confirming that God has attributes, he has hands, etc. So the same thing happens there. Well, they're metaphoric. Because they really integrated this Aristotelian thought. It really just seeped in everywhere. Would you anyone like to add anything? Any thoughts? Or... Okay, I'll keep babbling on then. So there's been many great intellectuals in Islam, such as Ibn Sina, Al-Ghazali, Ibn Rushd, and I think Al-Ghazali, because you've got statements in the Quran like God is one. So I'm pretty sure it's Ibn Rushd. He has a particular philosophical view of Islam. It's almost identical with Advaita Vedanta. So, because how do you deal with a statement that God is one? Well, if God is one, then what's everything else? So this Aristotelian conception really heavily influenced these Abrahamic religions, and therefore there's a heavy influence that God cannot have form. So, and even if there's statements in the scripture that he has form, they're allegorical, coming from this Greek influence. You'd like to say something, Prana?
Yeah, question. Did the Muslims, when there was this translation work going on, is that what it was called in Baghdad?
Translation movement, yeah.
Translation movement. Did they also reconcile the statements in the Quran about God having form as being allegory?
I'm definitely no expert on any of these things, but from my understanding, yes, or they're representational. Like hands means power, like you're reaching, you're moving something. So it's kind of metaphorical, like in that sense, representational. There's a lot of different streams of Islam as well. It's maybe a lot more diverse than maybe some people realize. One of the most influential Islamic philosopher, his name is Ibn Sina, or his Latin name is Avicenna, and he has some great philosophical works, and he was very much influenced by Aristotle in his writings as well. And also we see in the Christian tradition Thomas Aquinas, that Thomas Aquinas he used the term the prime mover, I believe. So this prime mover is very much similar to this unmoved mover of Aristotle, and so even in and then another Christian, Meister Eckhart, so he defines God as the ground of being, so similar to this formless Brahman. So we see like this conception of, and then this kind of comes back to that verse Vedanti tattva vidas totyam yazgyana madhvayam brahmeti paramandi bhavanati shabhyate. So this realization of Brahman, this formless aspect of the Supreme, it's a legitimate experience of the supreme truth. Like Brahman and Bhagavan, they're the same being, but Bhagavan is obviously the full realization with all the qualities and attributes, and Brahman, there's no attributes, there's no qualities manifest. Doesn't mean that they're not there. They are there, but they're not manifest at that stage of realization. So, and then, okay, so some of the rational or logical arguments against God having form. So what was used? One is that form is material, and anything material is limited, and the limited material form that we see is also comprised of parts, so it's divisible. And form also has spatial limitations. And we know in the different scriptures, God is unlimited, God is all-pervading, so therefore it doesn't logically fit into these categories of forms that we know. And it wasn't in their conception, it wasn't in their theology to have spiritual form. It wasn't even discussed in the Greek traditions as far as I'm aware. So these are logical and rational perspectives of why God can't have form. Mm-hmm.
What we do with all the stuff like the sand, what are they?
Well, I'm not an expert on any of these things, but perhaps I would say that they're some kind of maybe celestial or subtle form. But another argument that I think they put forward is, has anyone seen this spiritual form? No, because they're going off logic and rationale. That these are the tools of the philosopher, and so and logic and rationale is based on inference and pratyaksha, direct perception. And your inference is always based on what you've perceived. And you can only have cognition through that methodology on things that you have perceived and things you can infer from that direct perception. So that's their methodology. So that's why in Tattva Sandarbha by Jiva Goswami, he's talking about 10 kinds of praman, 10 valid means of knowing. And though the 3 that are favored are pratyaksha, direct perception, 2 anuman, inference, but still they both have some limitation, and the ultimate one is shabda, hearing, but revealed knowledge. That's the true authoritative means of knowing something within our Gaudiya school. But that shabda was not in the highest position in the Greek.
No, but you were speaking about heritage, like what we got from themselves. They get a philosophy establishing who is God, and it's quite personal. That it starts with we can there is Theos, and I'm not expert there, but if I remember well, there is something who creates the universe and all the gods, and there is war in between them, there is stories in between them, so they are quite personal. So how they get from that to God doesn't have form?
So the traditional Greek pantheon, that is not the same as Aristotle's prime mover or unmoved mover. So I understand what you're saying. What you're saying is more like and it's true, it's the Greek Puranic histories. But how Aristotle is interpreting the Logos through his logic and rationale, that is not the same as the personal forms that are more coming in, if you like, their Puranic histories. from my understanding.
So can we say that he started to create something new and period or they were having already an idea of what is God? Like it changed the way to think?
I remember Gurudev actually gave a couple of classes in a Nandam in Switzerland on this topic some years back, and he basically explains how the contraction of consciousness happened, and he goes down through the different Greek philosophers as well. And because even Plato, he talks about transcendent ideals and how the forms here are a reflection of their transcendent ideals existing somewhere else. But there was a further contraction of consciousness after that, and Aristotle comes along. So I guess as Kali Yuga progresses, the collective consciousness becomes contracted, and this is also reflected in the philosophers. And just another point here is there's philosophy and then there's theology. And theologians, they accept the limitation of philosophy. So it's better to be a theologian than a philosopher, because a philosopher, everything has to come through their mind and rationale. That's what they put in high regard. Andrew, you've got something?
There we go. Took a moment. So this goes back a little bit to what you were saying before about a lot of the differences in Christianity came by some people saying, all right, we're going to read this literally, what it says is what happened, and other people saying, well, no, allegorical.
That was more in the Quran and the Islamic tradition, that and that's still going on a little bit today. That there's either the literalists or the interpretists, but also there was in Christianity. Sorry.
So bringing that to, say, Srimad Bhagavatam, and in particular the commentary on it. So I've noticed various points where there are things that appear, and that's a very important word, appear to be contradictory on their face, or they're linked to time, place, and circumstance, or there may be a level of, again, the same sort of thing here. It's like, for example, from memory in the first canto, there were directions about the proportion of a person's income that should go to essentially the temple, or the time that, or what was it? We were talking about it the other night, how originally it was 64 rounds that we should be chanting every day. And what I'm trying to work out is, and obviously Guru and revealed knowledge is probably the answer, but I'm trying to work out to what extent this is something that we need to contend with, and the path that we can use to deal with it.
So if I just want to clarify, your question is there scope for some interpretation or within the Bhagavatam, and also with some of the stories or pointings also metaphorical? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that's, I guess, the first part, but the more important part is how we identify it. And I guess the answer there probably would be Guru. But yeah, I'm keen on your perspective about that.
First of all, I'd invite Krishna Primavati or Bhadra to share some thoughts on that question, if you desire.
Well, my understanding is that there are three ways of understanding the scripture, which includes Bhagavatam, of course, primarily Bhagavatam, and that is the literal, just literal reading. As is written, so it is directly. And then another way of understanding it is allegorical. It could, and there is definitely allegory in the Bhagavatam directly, the story of King Paranjana, etc. But even other stories like Prahlad Maharaj and Hiranyakashipu can be understood. There can be an allegorical way of understanding the story of Prahlad. I won't branch out into details right now, just encapsulating this idea. That, and the third way of understanding scripture is the esoteric, something very, very high it's indicating, pointing towards. Just a couple of examples that come to mind that Gurudev pointed out in the name, Krishna's name. For instance, Trivikram, 3 steps, right? And Narayana, the shelter of all living entities, and others, but others of those names, the Krishna Vaikuntha names, they actually have an esoteric meaning which refers to the leelas and rasas in Transcendental Braj. All those names actually have their esoteric meaning. So that the scripture is like that too. I'm sorry I can't elaborate on anything that I'm saying here, but that's my understanding. But really we do need to study the Bhagavatam under guidance. There's no doubt about that. If we just read it ourselves and see the literal meaning, we may get, filter that literal meaning through our samskars and not really understand it clearly. So, read it, study it by all means, absolutely. And listen to others, listen to commentaries on it by learned devotees. I think that was all I was going to say.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so I see the time's getting on a bit this evening, but I just wanted to share those thoughts tonight, and I'm not trying to put forward that I'm any scholar or authority on any of the subject, or I'm sharing any absolute statements, but the main essence of what I wanted to share is when we're particularly when we're interacting with practitioners of the Abrahamic religions, just giving some background of the samskaras they may be coming with, and then also just the general Western inheritance that is latent in the atmosphere, and just giving some background to that. And because I don't know about other people, but I personally come across this a lot. People have a real they really struggle with this God having form, and the default position is this kind of Brahmavad conception that the ultimate reality is this formless, whatever, hazy energy, and sometimes that energy can take a form and becomes Krishna or becomes Ram, but the ultimate reality is this light. Even so many Hindus have this Indian-bodied people. They have this conception at their root, and so I just wanted to share a little bit about where some of these samskaras may be coming from, and just how influential this Greek philosophy has been on Islam, on Christianity. And, for many people, even coming into Vaishnavism, we may have some Christian background, or even if we don't have any background, we're born in these Western countries, and we carry these samskaras just by having this culture, because you can't really separate culture from religion. Maybe nowadays it's more easy, but all cultures are shaped by religion, or have been shaped by religions that have moved through those lands. So these samskaras, from my perspective, it's helpful to be aware of them. And another thing is, the mind can only conceive of the material impressions we have, and we have no impressions of the absolute reality. So who are we to try and make conclusions about that ultimate reality through our own material intelligence and rationale. It's quite absurd. And it's not a humble position to take at all. So our material, logical intelligence has no place to, because by doing that we're trying to subordinate God, and we're subordinating that transcendent reality to the small pool of our own logic and rationale, which is exactly what's happened with some of these philosophers, and then that stream of thought has become majorly influential on revealed scripture. It's quite profound when you think about it, and so that's why we have to hear, and that comes back to that verse, like Sukadeva is saying, for those who have seen the truth. What does seen mean? Seen means those who have experienced the truth. Not through their mind, not that they sat down and come up with a lot of ideas and read some books. Those who have seen the truth.
Mm.
That truth is, in three categories. Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan. And so they have experience. So you have to hear from that person who has experience. So who's that? Sri Guru. And then that Sri Guru also gives us the tools of how we can come to that same state of Vyasadeva to have the revelation, not become Vyasadeva, of course, but to sit down and to go into samadhi. That's how the revelation comes to us, and from there, we also, all of our sastra, this is samadhi bhasha. It's trance language. It's come down when our acharyas have been in trance. When the mind-body complex, there's no filter there. But we're reading that sastra through our filter. So that's actually another point that came up earlier in Driva Dharma, something along the lines of, okay, I understand there's a Bhagavan, and that's the true ultimate reality, but the ideas I have about that Bhagavan, they are Maya. They are limited. So, even if, okay, I've read that in the Sastra and I've got a clear picture, still that picture that I have in my mind, it may be some kind of, it's a semblance of the truth, but it's not the actual thing. So, thank you for patiently putting up with that and listening. Would anyone like to share any thoughts? And yeah, so I'm not any kind of scholar on this subject. It's just been coming up a lot for me, this particular subject recently in a lot of my studies. So I thought I'd share this, and it's related to this chapter a little bit. And I come across this a lot, that people struggle with this form. Yes, Pranavalabha.
You referred to some verses from Christianity that speak about God having a personal form. There's one about God sitting on a throne, and another one I can't remember you quoted. Mm-hmm. Are these from the New Testament? Like, were they revealed by Jesus or his close associates? And so that's the first question. And I know you're no expert, but you've studied this a lot more than myself. Do you know what scholars say about what the motivation was for this personal reverence of early Christianity, or that was at least stronger, why that was taken out, substituted more for the impersonal philosophy that was made popular by the Greek philosophers?
So, in regards to your first question, I'm no Bible scholar, so I can't give you exact places, but I believe that God roaming around in the Garden of Eden, that would be the Old Testament, and then also I think Ezekiel is also from the Old Testament as well. I don't know for sure on that second one, to be honest, though. And why
What don't you know for sure on the second one?
the
What's
location
not clear
of
on that?
Ezekiel, his description of
Oh
God.
yes, it is in the Hebrew Bible.
Okay. And why did it move from the personal to the impersonal? That's because Christianity got grafted onto the rootstock of Platonic thought, of Greek philosophy. So when it came over to that, then it inherited all of these samskars. Well, form is limited by space, its material, etc., etc. So all these presuppositions of Greek philosophical thought and the conclusions that they'd already come to, then Christianity had to align to that. So then you get statements like, you get thinkers like that Philo, who reconciled it. Oh, well, these are allegorical. And just one point on our sastras, I think there's about 400,000 verses in the Puranas. Actually, from my understanding, I think it tells you every time that it's an allegorical story. It says in the Bhagavatam that Purujan, that this is an allegorical story. Nowhere else does it say, oh, actually all these stories are allegorical. And it doesn't say that anywhere in the Puranas. So therefore, out of all of these hundreds and thousands of verses, and a few places where it does say this story is allegorical, then the inference is these are true. And where they're not true, it states it. So that's another little point there. So basically,
confirmed.
Sorry, say
Yes,
again.
that's true. It's confirmed by the disciple who hears without samskars and has that revealed. The Shabda.
Yeah, that Shabda Brahma. So the main point I wanted to get into, I just wanted to give a little background tonight, that from where do some of these dvesha, these aversions to God having form, from where do they come from? So then when we get into conversations about the Murti, about Prampratishtha, about the Thakurji being alive, then we've already got some background of why myself or other people may have some aversion to it and from where that stream is coming from. Otherwise, we're jumping into a conversation and it's just like, there's all these unfinished thoughts, right? Like we don't know where our conditioning is coming from. So that's the context of why I wanted to share it tonight.
Awesome. That was just very interesting reading of the Bible. Really, I was absorbed in it and found it very nourishing. Not exactly Rasalila, but it's the subject that you're talking about this evening, this how the evolution of thought and the evolution of faith and how, or the devolution, how it has come about over the centuries, is an aspect of a subject that I just seem to be really fascinated in at the moment, along with the higher aspects of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, of course, not neglecting that. But this subject of ancient Christianity and how it developed and the influence of the Greek and the Roman and the pagan, which I guess pagan is really just Greek and Roman, isn't it? The influences thereof and how Christianity gradually kind of formulated as the centuries went by. And my experience in dealing with, I've got a lot of Christian friends, and that I don't really so much find them being of the idea that God has no form, exactly no form, but that God has a form, but you don't focus on it. It's vague. We don't know what it's like. There's no need to know what it's like. Jesus is the one that we focus on. He's God after all. So I just thought I'd add that little nuance of course, there are many people who struggle with God having a form. At the same time, I find a lot of people in the circles I'm mixing in at the moment, God has a form, but it's not to be focused on. It's vague. It's faceless. He's got a form, but it's faceless. And Jesus is the one.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for bringing that. And I'm not trying to convey that I'm speaking for everyone in any particular religion as well. And I think that's quite a widespread conception that so many Christians, they do have some kind of idea that God can have a form, but it's a very vague, hazy kind of understanding of anything of what that form can be like. And perhaps one influencing factor of that is this Greek influence, and it's this kind of ultimately this formless logos, but then you've still got this form in the Christian Bible, so it's kind of an uninvestigated domain of their scripture for maybe many Christians.
When you say you're talking about the form in the Bible, you're talking about God in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, yeah, because as we know, there's not vivid descriptions of God like we find in Gordius Astra.
Right, sure.
My understanding of God was that we were made in His image, so His form is similar to human form.
Yes.
Seems to be from Christian iconography that it's sort of, like these different statements have been mentioned tonight. What I've seen at least is just a combination of these, God is in a human form, he's sitting on a throne, surrounded by angels. It's sort of iconography.
I can say that in Christianity there is a lack of interest of developing a real relation with God, because there is nothing like to give them some interest. The focus is on the relation with the guru, Jesus in this case. And you can see like the influence. I agree with Venu about the influence come from the philosophy of the Greek, which change with time, but it's constant. Like for example, they have like a problem with the idol, but they have idol. In Christianity there is idol, and the question is why there is idol. And one of the reasons why there is idol is because when the Christianity went developing in different places, people were already having idols, and so they changed the form of the idols on something who is more near with what they were wanting to promote, to develop. So the woman idols became the virgin, and what was not going well with what they were wanting, they destroyed it. And what was going well with, they were just using it to incorporate in the Christianity. And so you can see also that the Christ in the cross is the main idol, and it's related with the relation with Guru, so no God on it. And there is like vision, or they think Christ is not different from God, so in this way they relate with God. So they doesn't have any real understanding of who is God.
I think there's also, it's about emphasis, and within that tradition there's a lot of emphasis on Jesus, and it doesn't make it wrong or anything. That's just the speciality, the Vaishishta of that tradition. That's where they're giving a lot of focus, and each tradition has their Vaishishta, their speciality, and maybe
we see as well, like often we can talk about God, but then some people might follow saying that you should just surrender to Gurudev and follow Gurudev and let Gurudev take you to Krishna and stop worrying about thinking of the form of Krishna, because, you know, with your little mind you can't quite gather that. So you should surrender to Gurudev. And that's part of the Vaishnava tradition also, that you know, you get to a point where in some point of your development or your understanding that you surrender to Gurudev, and other parts you might be trying to just know Krishna, but actually you can't know Krishna, and so you might go on for some time in that state trying to know Krishna by yourself, and then you get you build up some faith in Krishna, and then Krishna sends you guru, so then you get some association with some devotees, and then through the devotees you get to meet Gurudev, and then once you realize that through Gurudev you can find Krishna, then you surrender into your Gurudev and you put your focus on Gurudev so that you can see Krishna. And in a way that's similar to the Christian faith, you know, don't worry about God, don't worry about the form of God and his character and all his personality, just follow Jesus, because Jesus will take you there.
Well, that can explain why they doesn't have the focus on it for now. Makes sense.
Gurudev does engage his disciples in worshipping of the Vigraha, though.
That's a good point you're bringing, Devashi, about how you know, the guru is the vehicle to God, is the medium. So, you know, that is the point of emphasis in terms of our service. But like Pranavallabha said, there is also the worship of Thakurji, and in chapter 11 there's more of a conversation about that, like what the utility of worshipping the Vigraha. And, you know, it's an alambana, it's a support for the mind, and to meditate on something abstract is very, very difficult. So to have some kind of form of reference, even if it's Jesus on a cross, like many Christians, they have some kind of cross or some kind of focal point, right? And there in the Yoga Sutras, meditation is to meditate on something. You need something to concentrate upon. And meditation is more easier. So you either have your mantra or you have your object that you concentrate upon. Otherwise it's very hard to fix the mind, and if you can't fix the mind, you can't go into samadhi. You can't go into samadhi, you can't have revelation, generally speaking. So there's some methodology there. And also just want to add that why are people attracted to Brahman? It's because with this Brahmavad, you don't have to surrender, because you're already God. You're already Brahman. So, you know, it's appealing to the ego that I don't have to surrender to any guru or anything, because I'm already that. So it's satisfying for the.
And it's also focus inwardly, because where Paramatma is within the heart. So through that, concept that you are God, then you can go within, and if you go within, ultimately you can find Paramatma within the heart, and it's an effulgence also. So if you're concentrated on that effulgence, then you're also close to Paramatma in the heart, which is a path to God. So maybe it seems a little bit short of where we're going, but it's a direction, and some movement beyond, you know, some other limited concept or some step pre to that. So we reject it because we're taking a step further, and we're saying, you know, there's a personality of Godhead, and that we should concentrate on that. But those previous philosophies were, you know, were a step in a direction, and it was taking them from A to B, you know. and then in time your consciousness develops into maybe more of a personality of God. Maybe you'll have some experience in that meditation where you will come in contact with Paramatma, and then you'll have a realization that, oh wow, there's more to what I'm learning here. So it might seem limited, but it can take us point us in the right direction.
Yeah, there is a difference between that meditation on Paramatma in the heart and then Mayavad, like thinking I am God. That
Yeah, I'm just saying that meditation, I am God, it makes us go inwardly, and by concentrating inwardly, we can have an experience with Paramatma.
If we're fortunate, yes, then
Just
we'll be lucky.
Yeah.
Or meet
And so
devotee.
that's why that was followed, and it was those people held on to it so sincerely because they did have some experience through it. So that's what they followed. They thought these people aren't going to suck up the idea of some person God, so I'm just going to teach this. And through them believing that they're God because that's what they want to believe, they'll go inward, and then they have the potential to have that experience because they're quietening the mind and in a meditative state, which will put them into a trance-like state, which once that starts moving, then God just takes control and will reveal himself if it's meant to be revealed.
Yeah. The reason why like Ramanujacharya spends 100 pages in his Purva-Paksha against Advaita Vedanta, it's not necessarily maybe that he cares whether they're saying the world's real or unreal, or if there's an Atma or if there's not an Atma. It's in that conception they're saying that our beloved Bhagavan is not real. And when you say that your beloved Bhagavan's not real, then the scholars of that tradition are going to come at you. Anyone, when you tell anyone that, your beloved's not real, it's ultimately an illusion, then the scholars, they're going to have something to say about that. Otherwise, there's so much freedom in India. Even Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, you do what you want. Even Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, and this is important for us to remember as devotees, that Krishna says, I am also that Brahman. He is that Brahman. But he also says, for those who have the attraction towards the avaktya, the unmanifest, they are klesh adhikar. They have the eligibility for so much difficulty. And it doesn't please Bhagavan. He wants to have that relationship also. So, no one wants to surrender. And the personal paths are paths of surrender. And everyone wants to be the boss. Everyone wants to be the big cheese. But, when we really dive deep into Bhagavan, even the boss doesn't want to be the boss. Not in Golok. He just... The only boss in Golok is Prem. So even God's serving in that realm. But so we have to also be honest and see what's our motivation towards our spiritual orientation as well. And for so often, these Brahmavad motivations are coming out of a frustration of our material experience. And we want some ultimate cessation for that. But the Atma longs for rasa, prema rasa. So, would anyone like to add anything more? It's been a long session. Thank you for your patience.
It's just the conversation about Brahman made me think of this shloka in the Gita, 1854. Brahma Bhuta Prasanatmana Sauchati Nakankshati Samaha Sarvashu Bhuteshu Bhaktim Labhate Param. One who is thus transcendently situated at once realizes the Supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. He never laments or desires to have anything. He is equally disposed towards every living entity. In that state, he attains pure devotional service unto me. Mad bhaktim labhate param. And in the purport, I'll just read one sentence of the purport. Prabhupada says, I thought this was quite interesting, relevant to what we were talking about this evening. To the impersonalist, achieving the Brahmabhuta stage becomes one with the Absolute. It is the last word. But for the personalist or pure devotee, one has to go still further. So the devotee can come to the Brahman stage, the Brahmabhuta stage, but one has to go still further to become engaged in pure devotional service. See, I just thought that was interesting. We tend to think that coming to the Brahman stage, it's all impersonal. But a personalist can be there too, but they have to go further, develop further. Prabhupada said, I don't have any realization of this. I'm just repeating what I heard Prabhupada say, that the devotee gets a fast track to transcendental Braj. There's the Brahman stage, there's the Paramatma realization, and then Bhagavan realization. The devotee goes straight to the transcendental Bhagavan realization. But my gleaning of that over the years, I mean, Prabhupada sometimes he spoke in extreme sutra, just for us to get a basic idea. My gleaning of that statement is that it's not as though the developing devotee doesn't experience Brahman and Paramatma, but they don't dwell there. It's not considered a goal. It's just part of the journey upward to Bhagavan. And we're already, in one sense, we've been given Bhagavan already. His holy name, the 10th canto, all the Goswami's literatures. But at the same time, we can't do spiritual bypassing. We have to understand where we are at right now. And part of that journey encompasses Brahman realization and Paramatma realization. That's my understanding.
And if we have this experience with Brahman or Paramatma, then we, as a being, we're naturally inquisitive and we want to know more anyway. We won't really be satisfied with that. It might bring us some bliss and joy and a nice experience, but because we're naturally inquisitive, then we want to know, what was that? And we want to know more, so we keep searching. It's just like a natural thing for humans or any beings to do, is to naturally search things out and understand and to experience better things or have more understanding of what's happening around us.
Not always. I don't agree. I'm sorry. There's people who stop there because they are in a sattvic mode and they feel good in what they have, and the little experience they have, for them it's the ultimate, because they doesn't know nothing else. So that can be dangerous, actually. That's why our Acharya tell us to be careful with that. It doesn't mean that they will not go further, but it's not always happening.
Depends on our samskars.
Yeah.
What I've heard Gurudev share. And the samskars, we've got these special shesh samskars, like for all of us to get to that stage. Most likely you'd realize, actually, no, this isn't the ultimate goal. Then go beyond, keep meditating, keep chanting, and you can pass through that light. That's what I've heard. But for some people who've never had the association of acharyas who have realized Prem, then they might be with some other sadhu who has some Brahma realization, and then what their understanding is, there's some scars of that's the ultimate reality. So I agree with Anandina. I think I think for us that's the case, but it's not something that we can say is generally the case for everyone.
I
Some
think what
people
you're saying about
might get stuck in that, and they might go up and down in it, but ultimately there'll be a point where it'll get old, or it'll get that they will naturally seek further. And you're right that they can get stuck in that and get, but it's like anything new that is exciting, we can get caught on it for maybe a 5 or 10 years or 20 years or a lifetime of thinking, I'm really enjoying this experience, but everything in the material world gets old. And so in any of this Brahman experience will have its time and effect on us, and we might get caught stuck in that space for so long, but ultimately, because of our inquisitiveness and because of our attraction to Krishna, we will move past it. And it may take time, but it will happen. And I understand what you're saying, that we reject that because we know different, we've been taught different, but I acknowledge that we're speaking from two different points. But what I was trying to say is that if someone's following that path, then there's nothing wrong with letting them follow that path. If they're not quite ready to hear about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they want to reject it, then we can accept that the path they're taking will lead them there ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
But
we don't want to share things. We don't want to disturb anyone's faith.
Badri, you wanted to share something?
I did have a thought a minute ago when Pran Bala Prabhu was talking. I think he made a valid point in that we need a guru, a teacher. If we are at the Brahman level and we have a Mahabhagat, a Rasik Bhabuk guru, then there's very little chance, as far as I understand, the chances are greatly minimized that we're going to get stuck on the Brahman level, because we've got our guru who's bringing us higher. He's bringing us into transcendental approach. Whereas if somebody has come to the Brahman level and they don't have a guru, then yes, there's every opportunity, every likelihood that they'll just get stuck there in the bliss of vibrating in the light.
Mm-hmm.
So that the guru is of prime importance in that issue.
All things are going on by adhikar and samskar, and part of that samskar is sangha. Who are we associating with? So if we are fortunate enough to have some association with some Vaishnava, some guru, then there's an invitation, there's an opportunity that more can be developed. But also in Briha Bhagavatamrita, Gopakumar almost lost consciousness when he was going through the Brahmanda, through the light. And we've just read this evening that Mahaprabhu forbade people to read the commentary of Shankaracharya. So I understand what you're saying, Devashi, but it's also with samskar, what do we have inside? And we may have some Brahman experience, but if we're fortunate to have that samskara to keep going, we are very lucky. But for many people, and particularly what's been exported to the West from India since the 60s, it's largely been Advaita Vedanta traditions. Obviously, we know our Gaudiya tradition, but actually most of the gurus that have come, they're Advaita Vadis. But actually, in the whole context of India, Advaita Vedanta is not so prominent. It's actually Bhakti. maybe not bhakti how we understand in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, but it's devotion to different forms. I'm not saying that all those forms are on the same level, but it's how it plays out in India on the ground is there's a temple and there's some form there and people worship it. But how it's what's been exported to the West is mostly Advaita Vedanta.
Well, I don't agree. Apparently,
It's a really interesting point.
I don't agree with Venu because apparently they worship a form, but depend what is happening in your mind. Many people worship a form, thinking that's the light, that's just a presentation of the light, like you know that, Venu.
Actually, Anandini's also got a point that philosophically the conception may be quite off, but in terms of maybe the upasana, there's some practice of a form worship going on, but that discussion's also there in Jaiva Dharma that people can be doing something that looks like Vaishnavism or Bhakti, but it's actually not.
Point.
So there's so many nuances to each thing. Yeah.
And maybe we can come back on this subject next week and
Yes.
about more like what is written in the book.
But yeah, thank you everyone.
We follow what we have in front of us, and we're very fortunate that we have this teaching. Like you say, we can get stuck in other places, but we all go through all these experiences, and whoever's going through gets attracted to a different philosophy. That's what they're ready for. Like that's where they're meant to be. That's what I always believe, is that we're always where we're meant to be, and as we progress in life, Krishna provides opportunities, and we're very fortunate. We just here in this opportunity, and so we just follow this to this philosophy. So it's easy to see other philosophies as wrong, but ultimately they're a part of the whole. So it's not that one's right or wrong, it's just a progression.
Well, I don't think we'd say that there is a wrong or right. It's just it's not what we want.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying as well. I agree with what you just said. Yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you, Vena, for hosting this. It's been incredibly, very great learning, and I think really helpful for being able to relate better, especially to, like the Abrahamic traditions and understanding the main samskars, why they might have aversions to deity worship, and having that sort of in the back of my mind when talking to people.
Yeah, Benu, thank you so much. That was so interesting.